Good evening. We have Jon Richter tonight. He is known as Dave the Accountant by day. He currently lives in London and is a big fan of gaming in all forms, horror films, and almost anything else that is dark. He co hosts a podcast called Dark Natter with his friend Liam and is the author of two collections of short stories, a cyberpunk thriller, and two crime thrillers. So, hello, Jon. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about your books?
Hello. Thanks for having me. You are very kind to allow me on the show. I suppose I've been writing. Well, I've been writing since I was about, I don't know, 3 or something. Like literally, it's always been the thing that I've done as sort of recreation, I suppose. And so writing, reading, gaming, as you said, it's sort of always been a part of that, I suppose. I grew up with, like a ZX Spectrum where it was like text adventures, and it'd be like, you walk into a dark room, there's a sinister waxwork at the end of the corridor. So I think there's always been this like dark fiction thing going on for literally my entire life. But writing sort of professionally or with any modicum of success has only been happening for me in the last few years. So I wrote my first novel, I was probably in about 2014, 2015. And I think prior to that, I'd written quite a few short stories, just sort of for fun. This was the first time I wrote anything that was a bit longer. I was lucky enough to get a publishing deal, got a book published. That was great. That was my first kind of crime thriller, which is called Deadly Burial, which is a pun on wrestling because it's about a murdered wrestler. It's like a sort of a whodunit where the cast of suspects are all professional wrestlers, which I thought would be quite a good, interesting sort of cast of oddballs. No offense to any professional wrestlers who may be listening. And then since then, I've managed to do sort of 1 or 2 books a year. Couple of short horror collections, as you mentioned. Those ones are particularly weird. That's Jon Richter's Disturbing Works, volumes 1 and 2. And those are, although those are very hard to sell because not a lot of people read short horror fiction or are prepared to pay for collections of it. I'm probably in some ways the most proud of them because they are sort of the real inner workings of my mind. And then I've also had a couple more, probably a bit more commercially successful kind of crime thrillers. One was Never Rest, which came out a couple of years ago, and that is a sort of a story of another sort of murder mystery, really, where a detective has to go to an island, a sort of a fictional island called Salvation Island, which is off the coast of sort of Devon and Cornwall, that kind of way. And that's a kind of sinister place with secrets of its own. And then I released a couple of books this year, one of which was another sort of crime thriller called Rabbit Hole. And that one is actually about a sort of an investigative podcaster who sort of reopens a cold case mystery to try and sort of solve the case of a disappearing girl, which the police have failed dismally to solve. And that's probably, as you can tell, I'm trying to do things that are just a bit different, and that's maybe what I'm going for. And then my other book, as you mentioned, was my first foray into the world of kind of cyberpunk, which at its heart actually is still a detective murder mystery crime thriller. It's just set 20 years in the future with a few robots and AIs and stuff like that in it. But that was really fun to write, so I may give that another go in the near future.
So, like you've just mentioned, which Auxilliary London 2039 is your cyberpunk book. For anyone that's watching that doesn't know what cyberpunk is, do you want to tell us?
Yeah, I will do. It's funny. I didn't actually sit there and go, I'm going to write a cyberpunk book. I just had this idea that I was getting interested in some of this kind of emerging technological trends. So, you've got your kind of augmented reality, and obviously kind of as I'm into gaming, and as video games get progressively better and better and more impressive. Not that I can get my hands on a PS5 for love nor money, but never mind.
2 weeks.
Hey, well, we'll see. Yeah, that's right. Actually, we'll watch the space for some more stock. Thank you. Robots is again, if you've grown up with kind of dark fiction, sci-fi, there's a crossover there, isn't there, between the kind of worlds of sort of horror and sci-fi. You've got things like Terminator. So I've always been very interested in all that stuff. So I just fancied having a crack at writing a story about it. But actually, when you end up with elements of like near future dystopia, big corporations running the show, crime's been committed with a bit of a noir kind of detective feel to it, then before you know it, you've kind of ticked the boxes of what constitutes the cyberpunk genre. So without really intending to, I'd kind of written something that was in that sort of vein. So I guess the staples of cyberpunk is really Blade Runner, the movie, where again, if you think about it, it's sort of it is a noir kind of detective story, so it's centered around kind of Harrison Ford's character. There's the book by William Gibson, I think I've got that right, is Neuromancer. That's the other one that's kind of cited as almost like the genre kind of start point. And of course, Blade Runner itself is adapted from a Philip K. Dick thing with a different Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. So there's a big backlog of dead good stuff to read if you decided to sort of dive into cyberpunk.
Yeah, I mean, for anyone that doesn't know, I've read Auxilliary London 2039, and it wouldn't normally be something I'd pick up, and I absolutely loved it. So,
well, thank you.
That's very kind of you. It's wicked. And the same as Rabbit Hole, I think I liked it because it was different. And as you know, I stayed up till about 10 to 2 in the morning to finish it because I couldn't put it down.
Music to my ears. So thank you for your
Especially
kind words.
When I'm getting up at like 4:30 to go to work, then you're very on it because it's not something I do.
It does happen though. It's good in it though. That's when you know you're enjoying a book, and you're just kind of sat there and like, oh, just do one more chapter. Oh no, and you're looking at the clock thinking I have to get up in 5 hours. Oh man, maybe I can do 5 hours sleep. 4, 3. Oh, yeah, that's happened to me a few times.
Luckily, when I go to work, they just pass me coffee. There's no question.
Yeah, that's the magic solution to everything, isn't it?
Oh yeah. So talking about Rabbit Hole, are you planning to carry that on and bring Elaine Napier back for any more investigations?
Well, I probably cocked that up a bit with the ending, really, which I suppose I should be careful and not give any spoilers, but to try and do this in a weird cryptic way. So my plan when I started writing it was exactly that. I was like, oh, quite like this investigative podcast idea. This could spin out a few, you could get lots and lots of mysteries that she could investigate. And then it sort of went off down a different route where I couldn't resist the ending sort of development, which somewhat hampers her ability to return, shall we say? But not beyond the realms of possibility. You can always write yourself out of a hole, I think. So she could. You never know. She could make another appearance, but we'll see.
So, your decision to write in 2 genres, is that more accident than planning?
Oh yeah, it's funny. I suppose I'm surprised there aren't more writers who do that, and maybe there are, and I'm talking rubbish. But I do get the impression a lot of people. I mean, some people have different pseudonyms, and you almost don't necessarily know that it's the same person writing in multiple genres. And I know there's a few people who are, for example, female writers who have written a crime thriller and also like a romantic comedy book, and they'll very deliberately often choose to use 2 different names, and that makes complete sense. But yeah, I suppose you just write whatever you're in the mood for, and if that happens to be like horror or crime, or I wrote a fantasy thing last year that may or may not end up in the sort of on the shelf, but we'll see. And like, I just was in a big fantasy mood primarily because I just played Dark Souls for the first time.
Is that the one that I read?
You did read that.
Then you need to get that out there, please.
Well,
I was telling Duncan about it, so you need to finish it, please.
I think it needs a different ending, but I haven't quite figured out what the different ending will be. But yeah, at some point I will dust that off again and try and do something with it. But yeah, so I think that the multiple genre thing isn't, again, it's not really I've decided I'm going to do this other genre. It's more like, oh, I've got this idea, let's write this. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Talking of Duncan, he's expressed an interest in writing with you. Is this something you'd be interested in? And what genre would you like to write with?
Well, I mean, it's a big compliment, that, isn't it? That's a lovely thing for Duncan to say. And there was one other writer, a fella called, I should plug him actually, Matt Adcock, who's written a book called Complete Darkness, which is a sort of interesting take on cyberpunk religion with a bit of Ian Banks I thought that was a really good book. And he said something similar. I think he just sort of said it off the cuff on Twitter. He's like, "Oh, interested in a collaboration." And on one hand, it sounds ace, doesn't it? It'd be great to work with somebody who's as good a writer as Duncan. And certainly, I've read a few collaborations that I've read are brilliant. Like there's one called, I think it's called Black House, which I think is Stephen King and Peter Straub. Probably saying that wrong. And it's like a horrible. Starts off as like a serial killer thriller, but then it goes off all supernatural. And the killer is like a really, 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 really old man in an old folks' home, but he's pretending to have dementia and be senile. And then at night, he just busts out and chops people's heads off and stuff. And you're like, that's brilliant. So you can see that you can do these really effective collaborations. I suppose I'm sort of a bit scared of it because I'd worry that I'd either offend, annoy, upset, and I can be a bit of a control freak. So then it's like, do you do a chapter each and then put them together? But what happens if you don't like each other's chapters or you've got a different idea for the? So I'm sort of in my head, it's definitely something I'd love to do, but I'm sort of a bit scared of actually doing it. If that makes any sense.
I'd love you. I think that'd be great. If you read Liars by Patricia Dixon and Anita Waller.
I haven't, and that's a great example of obviously a bloodhound sort of collaboration between two great writers, but I haven't actually read that. I'm not sure if you've read that and some of their other solo work, but if you have, can you tell that does it feel different kind of thing?
I can tell because I've read everything by both.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, brilliant.
So Patricia sets a lot of her stuff in France because she has a house over there, and her character in Liars goes to France, lives in France. So I was like, well, that's obviously Patricia writing. But if I didn't know that, then I don't think you'd be able to tell necessarily. But they write a character each, and it just works perfectly. It really is a good example of two writers being able to bring something together.
No, brilliant. And maybe that's the thing to do as well. I need to read more of my fellow label mates' books because I'm not the best at. I'm finding that when you're busy, you're sort of working and then you're writing on the side. And by the time you've done those two things, you haven't actually done that much reading. So my reading input has been quite poor in the last couple of years. So maybe that's the thing I need to do is read specifically read that book as a collaboration to see what it's like.
Yeah, it is very good. And that brings me around actually to your horrible parts or your horrible full-time job. How do you manage to write and play games and read and eat and sleep?
Well, on one level, it's dead easy because I've got no kids. So when you hear about what people who have kids' lives are like, they just spend most of it running around after kids, taking them to football practice or whatever it is that kids do. So that is it. So I appreciate I've got like a chunk of time back that some other people maybe don't have. And I suppose I just like to try and be as sort of productive as I can. So I don't sleep as much as I probably should do, because to me that's like sort of dead time when you could be doing something more interesting. So I try and spend as many minutes of the day doing something that I sort of count as being productive. This is real nonsense, like garbage logic, this. So it's like, it's productive if you're going to work because, you get paid. It's productive if you're writing because I love writing and that's the whole thing I want to spend as much time as possible doing. It sort of also counts as productive if you're kind of consuming a new story that you've never. So like if you're watching a film that you've never seen before, that sort of counts. But if it's rewatching an old film, then that's just a frivolous waste of guilt. And like I try and get out run. I do a lot of running to kind of try and keep fit. So that's something to sort of cram in. So yeah, maybe that's it really. It's just trying to I try and do as little as possible of like slob lounging around watching the telly, I'm just that phrase like veg on the couch. I try to not do that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. You're originally from Wigan. What brought you down to London?
Yes, yeah. Hopefully I've not like picked up too much of a southern accent. I don't think so, but you never know. I'd sort of always wanted to just have a crack at living in London because I quite like city. I spent a few years living in Liverpool, because both me and my then missus had a job. We both worked there, so it was just, oh, let's just move there. That's convenient, and we had a really good time. And then we moved back to Wigan for reasons, and then it was like, right, let's, time to move. And so we got, I'd got a new job in London. She had the opportunity to kind of relocate. So we just sort of went for it. And although, as you can tell from me saying my then missus, I mean, she's not my missus anymore. So sadly, that relationship came to an end a few years ago. But not everything sort of lasts forever. And I think the move to London for both of us has been good. I definitely kind of like it. There's a lot going on, although not really in lockdown. There's very little going on. Hopefully that'll be over soon. But just things you take for granted as well. It's like, oh, I fancy some sushi for tea, I'll go and get some. Oh, I fancy going watching a band, I'll see what gigs are on. And in somewhere like Wigan, there's positive aspects to it, but those things just are not there. So yeah, it just feels like a slightly more interesting place to live, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm quite envious, although I don't live that far away, but London's my favourite city, easily. I love going and spending
I probably
the
just
there.
Offended the entire population of Wigan now, though, so that'll be it. I'll be like banned from the town, and they'll all throw meat pies at me next time I try.
Yeah, I'm speaking to Malcolm Hollandrake on Tuesday, and he lives in Wigan. So if you get a
Oh,
message from him,
don't tell him what I said.
Did you always want to be an accountant?
No, I don't know why I've ended up doing that. It was a bloody crap idea. I was just really daft when I was a teenager, so I dropped out of. I was quite good academically, got good marks on stuff, got good GCSEs, didn't really try very hard. And then suddenly you go to college and it's like, oh, it's actually a bit hard this. You actually have to study and work hard. And I just couldn't be arsed. So I just dossed around and dropped out. And then, so suddenly I found myself, I was 18. I did a little bit of acting at the time. So I'd been on, like, had a couple of little parts on the telly, very little parts. But at the time I was like, oh, I'm amazing. So I think I just thought I don't know, going to suddenly have this career in, I don't know what I thought. And then before I knew it, I was like 19 and I'd been working in like a supermarket for about £2 an hour or something, unloading like the deliveries off the back of a lorry. And when you're like, why have I done this? How did this happen? So then it was like, right, I need to get a proper job, proper job. And then I think in my head, a proper job was like, I have to, have a tie on and work in an office, and that'll be better. I don't know why I thought this, but that is what I thought. So I just got a job as like an office junior in like an accounts office in Wigan. And then, when you just kind of snowball, so it's like, oh, that I was quite good at it. So then the boss was kind of encouraging it. So then he's like, oh, you ought to study, and why don't you go and do the AAT qualification? And then I just did that. And then I just did the full chartered thing, and that was sort of evenings and weekend. And then just before you know it, your life's just become about this thing, and you've been doing it for years and years. Now you're an accountant and you're getting paid more, so that's good. And yeah, so I had to make this real conscious effort to sort of stop just only doing that and sort of resurrect the writing thing when I got to about 30, which was a depressingly long time ago. But yeah, so that's kind of how it happened. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, more than you believe. So far, a lot of the authors I've spoken to have said that they're, apart from having a #1 bestseller, their dream is to have one of their books made into TV series or a film. Which of your books would you like to see that happen, or all of them?
Yeah, that would be ace. That I would look. So I tell you, actually, rather than say, so the Auxilliary London 2039 is probably quite sort of filmic, if that's a word. So you sort of could imagine how that could get converted into that sort of format, and maybe a lot of my stuff is not, they're written in quite a visual scene by scene way. So I think the stories come in a non-literary way. They come in quite I'm going to say filmic again, it's probably not even a word. So I think they probably do lend themselves to that, if anyone's watching who wants to pick one of them up. But forget all that. I'd like to see the short horror stuff get made into a series, because it would be the just most horrible, nastiest series ever, and would probably be quite niche, but I would like it.
Yeah. Have you seen Cat's Eye, the Stephen King short stories?
have not. I have not seen that.
Well, you need to sort that out because they are ace. They're really, really good. I've seen it a few times. Yeah,
Brilliant.
they're based on Stephen King short stories. So yeah, you need to check
And
that out.
and I've not, I've read quite a lot of Stephen King over the years, but he's so prolific at his output. There's loads of stuff I've still never read, and I don't think I've ever read any of his short stories. And I bet there's some real bonkers, like weird, terrifying stuff in there.
Yeah, I hold my hands up and say I haven't read any of his short stories either. I've read his other stuff, but never. So yeah, but Cat's Eyes is based on something, I think. So yeah, check it
There's
out.
some really good, like there's some really good short, dark, horrible fiction, and I don't know. You get shows like sort of The Outer Limits or whatever, or even Black Mirror, even things like that are kind of a one story per episode, and there's some really good stuff that's been done. But it just, I don't know. There's a few of those shows that Black Mirror is really successful, but a lot of successful series do seem to be a big, long, sequential, Game of Thrones style, I suppose. But I quite like those where it's just a one-off and 1 hour and next kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, it's much better. The author community seems like a really supportive place. If you found your fellow authors to be helpful.
Yeah, like yes is the answer to that, and I'm not just saying that because that's what you would, you know what I mean. Like, I'm quite surprised at how supportive and nice people are. So you can, you'll find like you're on like a Facebook group with people from your same publisher, and if you just, how long does it take a dead body to decompose in water? There's just like a little support group of morbid knowledge. But yeah, people are always happy to kind of retweet or support. It's your release day, and they'll sort of help promote. And obviously, you need to do your bit and reciprocate. Sorry, you don't. I guess that's the point. You don't need to do your bit and reciprocate. There's no expectation. No one will moan at you if you don't. They'll just help you out anyway, so that you're motivated to reciprocate and do your bit, which is really nice. So there's definitely, I've never encountered like I've never had not one shred of like a, unpleasantness in any encounter with any other writer at all, really, online. Maybe I'm just really lucky. But like, even Twitter, I don't even find Twitter to be that bad. People talk about it as if it's this real toxic cesspool of evil. And I think as long as you don't engage too much with obviously controversial, so it's like I could pile in and be like, oh, I hate Donald Trump, and slag off Republicans, and then before you know it, you've got 500 Republicans who you've offended, and there's just no point. There's nothing to be gained. So I think if you just sort of don't do that, then generally that whole sort of interaction online space is nice, I think. So far anyway.
Yeah.
My laptop's shouting at me that it's going to run out of battery because I've stupidly not plugged it in. Do you mind if I go and get me plug?
I'll pause.
You could like sing some music temporarily? No. Okay, that was a terrible idea. I'll be right.
You haven't had to sing, just no.
Well, I definitely.
Right, you were talking about your podcast. Would you like to tell us more about that?
Yes, yeah. Thanks for reminding me to plug it shamelessly. So it's called Dark Natter, which is a good pun that I'm very proud of, and it really only exists because I thought of that pun. So it's like I have to make this into reality now. So I'm talking earlier about my sort of dark fiction, love of dark fiction. Yeah. It's not quite the same as horror. You can have things that are sort of like got sort of unsettling elements, dread, psychological kind of. Doesn't have to, like, here's like an random example that pops in mind would be like the movie Memento, the Christopher Nolan movie. I would class that as dark fiction, but it certainly isn't a horror movie. So if that helps to explain my sort of broad, that's what I like. I mean, Tarantino movies, they're dark fiction. They're not horror, but they're definitely dark and sort of really unpleasant, but in a good way. So my mate Liam, just as he likes all the same stuff, he's the same way inclined as I am in that regard. So we sort of talked about it I think we both got into podcasts around about the same time a few years ago, started listening to them, which is a funny archaic term, isn't it? Because they're called podcasts as a reference to iPods, and yet there's a whole generation of people now who probably don't know what an iPod is, because you don't need them anymore, do you? They were like fleeting.
God, that's depressing.
Weird, isn't it? There was just on a few years iPods were needed, and now it's just, well, just use your phone. So we talked for ages about doing this. We had this name, Dark Matter, and then one day it was like, right, let's do this then. So we recorded the first episode, which was actually about Stephen King, and it was just the two of us having a chat. And then it's really easy to pick sort of subjects. So every episode, which is roughly every fortnight, we've been doing it for about a year. We just pick a topic. One of us, we take it in turns. One of us pitches to the other one a sort of a dark fiction topic. So that could be the complete works of an author like Stephen King, or we've done H.P. Lovecraft. It could be a specific book. So we've done Dracula. It could be a movie. So we've done like the Terminator franchise. Or it could be a video game, or we've even had some really weird stuff. We had a guest on who did the Disneyland Haunted Mansion ride. We did War of the Worlds, the Jeff Wayne musical version. So we're just trying to cover as much different stuff as we can. But there's just endless amounts of it out there. And it's dead easy to do because the vast majority of it, we don't even have to do any research because we've already read or watched or played the thing anyway for fun. Although we did a special a week or so ago for Friday the 13th. We watched every Friday the 13th movie back to back, which is 12 of them, and they're largely shit. So that was quite a slog, but glad that's over.
And you watched all the Halloween movies as well, didn't you, last year?
We did. There's 11 of them as well. Although, so my just divisive opinion. Halloween is definitely better than Friday the 13th. Fact that Michael Myers is a more interesting villain than Jason. That is just my view. Not that Jason doesn't have some highlights. Like there's, I think in one of the films he punches a bloke's head off into a bin. I enjoyed that. But Halloween, better soundtrack, that iconic theme tune, better villain, more logical sort of backstory-ish if you squint a bit and ignore some of them. So yeah, that's my assessment based on watching, what was that, 23 films in total.
I think that's probably fair. I listened to your Stephen King episode this morning, and my only complaint is it's too short. There's no way you can cover everything by Stephen King in just over half an hour. Yeah, so you need to do another one.
And we could revisit that, because I think because it was the first one we ever did. We were just, do you know what I mean, kind of experimenting with it. So you'll find like we've probably done an hour and 20 minutes podcast on one game, and then the complete works of Stephen King got crammed into about 35 minutes. So I think you're right. I think he deserves a revisit, actually. But
yeah, just a personal request, but yeah, it was still good.
It was weird because I suppose the first time you ever record a conversation with your friend, if you've never done it before, that's a strange kind of, and now of course we're back in lockdown, so we can't do it face to face. We're having to do it remotely, but
yeah, I know.
Christmas special coming up soon. Watch this space.
Yeah, when is the next one due out?
We've got one where Liam's having a break for a couple of episodes, and we've got a couple of guests on with me instead. So one of them we've got coming up in a week or so is The Thing, with a fellow writer called Jacob Stephen Moore, who's got a horror novel coming out next year that's certainly heavily inspired by The Thing, but is like a really good original take on the idea. He's dead good. And then I've got The Last of Us 2 coming up soon, which is this year's best video game, in my opinion. But quite a divisive game online, so we've got a bit of controversy to discuss. And then Liam's back for the Christmas special, where I won't tell you what it is to create an aura of mystery. But what I will say is that there might be some gremlins in the recording. That was a bit too obvious, but yeah, gremlins. We're doing gremlins.
Oh God! Good old gremlins. They terrified my childhood.
So it's funny. Most people, when you talk about that film, they sort of don't think of it as they're like, oh yeah, Gizmo was really cute. Oh, that film was silly. I'm like, it's a proper horror film. It's Gremlins 1. It's properly scary if you watch it when you're about 8, like you and me probably did.
Yeah, it's terrifying. Really, Gizmo's like cute until they get wet, and then they're like these weird devil things. Like, oh.
And it's like the whole story is just genius. It's like the pacing of it, like the gremlins pop up in his house. There's about 6 of them. They have that. Remember that old scene with his mum in the kitchen, and she's like shoving it in a blender and microwaves one of them. But then one of them gets away, and it's like, right, one's escaped. What have we established? If they get wet, they multiply. So he just straight to the YMCA and jumps in the swimming pool. That's I love that. That's ace. What a good idea. And that's you get like writer envy, you know, when you like read something or watch something and you just think, oh, I wish I'd come up with that. But anyway.
Yeah. Duncan wants to know what your next book is about and where the idea for it came from.
Okay, here's the pitch. So Die Hard meets Wool meets Black Mirror in lockdown, which I think is probably an original combo, if nothing else. So basically, the idea was I'd just written that fantasy thing. And I was kind of struggling with it and not sure what to abandon it. And it was like, right, I need to just start a new project. And this was in about, I don't know, like February. And I was sort of weirdly, timing wise, you know, lots of people have been very unlucky and been affected by, you know, the pandemic and been furloughed or lost their jobs. I had the complete opposite experience. I was off work for about 6 months on a little mini sabbatical. Then the pandemic broke out just as I got a job. So I've been working through the whole thing in kind of lockdown. So I should count, you know, very fortunate. And so that sort of month or two prior to starting that job, and I was off work wanting to do a writing project. And somebody had sort of made a comment about, oh, I bet, you know, this whole pandemic is good inspiration for a, you know, dark fiction writer. And there's a whole thing online that people talking about whether you should include the COVID in your fiction. And the 99% of people seem to be saying, no, I'm just pretending it's not happened. No one wants to read about that because it's, you know, a big horrible thing that's happened, and it is. But I suppose I was just a bit, well, but it did happen. So what, we're all just going to like pretend that there was no pandemic in 2020 because there was one. And then I thought, well, and it is an interesting situation that we're in. I know, again, don't hope I'm not sort of offending anybody by, I know there are lots and lots of people who've had bad things happen this year because of it, but it is this really unique, bizarre situation where we're all spending most of the year like trapped in our houses and we can't go out, going crazy with isolation. So I just thought, let's try and write a book with that, sort of extrapolate it forward. What if everybody's not gone out for years? What if everybody's been trapped, you know, behind closed doors? The lockdown never ends. And just what would that do to people, and what story might spin out of that? And it's ended up being this like completely bonkers skyscraper sci-fi type thing, which it hopefully is an entertaining story, but we'll see. So I'm still in the process of kind of hacking that together and hope, watch this space, hope to release that next year. One question will be, is there anyone who wants to read sort of fiction that references the pandemic, or does it need to be a bit anonymized and a bit more fictionalized, maybe? So that's a quandary, I guess, to ponder with the publisher.
Well, interesting. I reviewed Dylan Young's Trauma on the 5-Star Bar this morning, and he actually references the pandemic, and I didn't mind. And Josephine Whitton, who was reading it as well, she said it's such a fleeting mention that actually it was fine. So I think, I think
maybe when it's a bit less, that there's an element of in the future, it'll, when hopefully you know, there's a vaccine and life's gone back a bit more to normal, maybe that'll be a bit less raw for people. And I suppose there's an element as well of, if you read a book set in the 40s, you don't pretend there wasn't a Second World War, because there was one. So that's, I suppose that's the logic anyway. But you never know, people may have a different view. Some people may not want to read it. There may be zero appetite for that as the kind of subject matter. So we'll see, I guess.
Well, when you let me read it, I'll tell you.
Deal. Yeah, let's see what you think.
Yeah, awesome. Not that I don't have enough to read already, but it's fine.
I'm picturing that there's this massive, you know, people talk about their like to be read pile. I've got this image that behind the screen on the other side of your room is just going to be this massive 500 books just in like a mountain.
Yeah, and all my textbooks next to it just
Oh
taunting
yeah.
me about insects generally. Yeah,
I
that's
think that
fun.
sounds dead good. That though, all your forensic studies sound really interesting to me.
It is
Oh,
actually. I won't lie, it really is. But
brilliant.
when you've got assignments to do, not so fun.
Oh yeah.
Not so
Yes.
fun. So, if you were to invite four famous people to a dinner party, who would you invite?
I forgot that you were going to ask this, and I even had in my head like a good clever answer, and I must write that down. I forgot to do that, and now I have no idea. So I was just going to make something up off the cuff. So I'm going Rick Mail and Adrian Edmondson because they're
Yes.
dead funny, aren't they?
Oh god,
Ace.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
hard to pick a favorite. Well, you don't have to have a favorite, do you? Just get both of them as a duo. But people whose faces just make you laugh just by seeing their faces.
Yep.
So get Richie and Eddie sat there, maybe hitting each other with, I don't know, pans or like baseball
Yeah.
bats or something just to liven it up a bit. So that would be good. So I suppose we'd have to temper that with like a slightly more highbrow literary person. So I'd probably have Ian Banks because he's, I think, probably my favourite writer. I've read almost every Ian Banks novel and every Ian M. Banks novel, which was his kind of sci-fi, not so much of an alter ego because it was kind of obvious that it was him, just the same. But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, they were really good because he used to write about a very distant future utopia, not a dystopia. And I think it's in some ways it's quite brave to do that because it's harder to write. You've got to manufacture a conflict instead of it being, there was a certain repressed population and evil corporate. It's almost like anti-cyberpunk in a weird way, but he managed it and they were all dead good. So he can come. And then, right, my fourth one. I will have. I've always had a soft spot for villains in things. Like there's a bit of underdog. Like the Roadrunner and the Coyote. Like that Roadrunner was just an annoying dick. I was desperate for the Coyote to catch him and bloody cut his head off and eat him. So I'd have to pick a villain, but it's which villain would be the best one? Gollum, he can come. I feel a bit of an affinity there for some reason. Similar hair.
That sounds like a fun dinner party.
Yeah, could be eventful,
Yeah.
maybe.
So if I were to restrict it to four authors, then who would you choose?
Right, so that's three down. Although I bet Rick Mail must have written a book. But okay, we'll cut it back to we'll get Stephen King there because I bet he seems like a good laugh and a very, 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 very good writer. So I could just mine him for tips, I think. Although we're lucky, aren't we, that he's written a few books on the subject of the craft of writing. Like I
Yeah.
always remember, I always trot this one out on the podcast, but he talks about there being like three different levels of. It's like you've got, I can't remember exactly what he called them, but I think you've got sort of dread, horror, and then the gross out. And it's like dread is you're in a dark room, there might be something there. Horror is you've turned the lights on and there's a monster in the room. So the point being that dread is the more effective one because it's more stimulating your imagination and the uncertainty. And the longer you can tease that out before you kind of reveal the monster, the better. And I just think sometimes people, certainly TV shows and films, forget that all the time, and you just get this onslaught of like CGI, scary stuff, and it's just not scary. And then the level 3 is like the cheap cop out of what he calls the gross out. So that would be like you're in the dark room, you turn the lights on, there's a monster, and it's eating someone's head. And I quite like a gross out, so it's like when I wrote those short stories, my formula was sort of dread for as long as possible till it's outstayed its welcome, still going with the dread, no reveal, and then just to skip the second bit altogether and go straight to the gross out for the finish. I quite enjoy that. So he can come. So that's two. I've definitely got to have a fellow Bloodhound writer there, but it's almost kind of impossible to pick someone, isn't it? That's a really difficult choice because there's just so many. You're trying to think, oh yeah, I'll pick because they did a nice thing, or they seem really funny. But loads of them, they're all great actually. So maybe if all of them could get, sort of stand on each of the shoulders, but then put like a big coat on, so it just looks like one person. So every Bloodhound writer in a column.
That's
And then
cheating.
It's probably it was a decent cop out that though.
No.
What do you think?
Nice try, but
Then,
no. So
in that case,
they all know that they're a bit welcome. That's fine. So then, who are the other two you're going to choose?
I would have who's the mind blank, but the guy who wrote Harlan Ellison, who wrote various things, including my favourite short bit of dark fiction ever, which is I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, which is a short story about a future supercomputer global, let's hand over the running of all the military to this thing. And it's called AM, the Allied Master Computer. And it obviously immediately goes completely evil, kills everybody except for 5 people. And it keeps the 5 people alive just to torture them because it hates humanity so much. And I thought, wow, geez, that's an intense story. And that was basically Terminator nicked its idea from that story. He sort of sued him or whatever. They did a settlement, gave him some money. And he's mentioned in the credits at the end. You get like a little Harlan Ellison reference. And I get the impression from my limited knowledge of him and his work that he was a bit of a character. So he can come and frighten us all. And then 4th one, right? Okay, Harness, Ian Banks, Stephen King. 4th writer, I will invite Mark Danielewski, who I know absolutely nothing. I don't even know if he's alive or dead. Sorry, Mark, if you either of those things. I just know he wrote probably my favourite book, which is House of Leaves. So he can come and we'll all quiz him about that, because that is like a masterpiece, brilliant, amazing bit of stuff. But I know very little about the writer.
Awesome.
And I don't know what I would cook them. I can't really cook. They can all have a Marmite sandwiches.
Takeaway, obviously.
Yeah, pizza. Yeah,
order stuff in. What's wrong with you, man?
Yeah.
Yeah.
KFC.
Yeah.
What are you moaning about, Harlan?
Yeah.
Chill out.
You live in London, you could cater to every need.
I wonder what Stephen King likes. What do you reckon he would eat?
I don't know, actually.
Just human dead.
Yeah, like roadkill and stuff.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
I'm sure he doesn't. I'm sure he's probably a vegan or something.
Yeah, pass. I don't know. You're probably right.
So post this crazy world, no restrictions anymore. What does your perfect day look like?
So it wouldn't have any accounting in it. So I wouldn't have to pretend to be Dave the accountant, which is my real name. I'm called Dave. I could stick to my much more enjoyable alter ego of Jon Richter and write stuff. So it would be a good chunk of writing. I would probably go out for a run, which I know sounds really kind of lame. Go for a run, but I have found, I don't know, as you get older and you just learn to kind of manage your mood and your personality a bit. It is a bit like a miracle. If you just go out for a run, I just find myself just cheered up loads when I get back. So it does help that, I think. So I'd probably do that in the middle of the day, maybe for a break. And then there would be an element of video gaming, but productive gaming, like completing a new game that you've never got to the end before, that's got a gripping plot, whatever that game may be, ideally on the PS5, which I haven't yet bought. Not that I'm bitter about that. And I
doesn't come across.
All of that, yeah, not at all. Crunching the table. What? All these people showing off about them on Instagram, and I bet they don't even care. I bet they don't even buy Demon Souls. Anyway, so all those sound like quite solitary pursuits, because they are. But I do like socialising and chatting, as you can tell, because I talk a load of bollocks. So I'd probably spend the evening with, I suppose my lovely missus who's in the other room, and I'd force her to watch some horrible film while we drank some booze. That sounds all right, doesn't it? As a plan for a day.
Yeah. But it's your day. It's your perfect day. So that's good for you.
Right.
Then.
Right. Yeah. That's it.
It's not for me to judge. I'm just asking.
I think that's probably about it. Like, maybe do a podcast with Liam at the end of we'll fit that in somewhere. That could be good too.
Do your colleagues know that you have an alter ego and that you write books?
I'm not very secretive about it, because I suppose I am quite proud of it, so I do tell people about it, partly to try and convince them to buy the books, which is shameless. self-promotion. So yeah, I don't really mind the two bits of your life sort of blurring together in that way. I'm not that bothered. So, because I sort of think, well, I think your books are all right. So if somebody was, if one of your colleagues was to read one and be like, that's a bit rubbish, like, fine, they're welcome to that opinion. I have it's funny. So what you'll find is some people who are, quite close friends or colleagues you've worked with for years or whatever, and they just won't read your stuff because maybe they don't read very much, or they just don't fancy it, or they don't like that genre or whatever. And then you'll get other colleagues who you barely know, or you think like they don't like you very much or whatever, and then suddenly they'll come, oh, I read your book, it was great, and you're like, oh. So yeah, it's a bit random who sort of is interested, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's the same with doing this actually. My nan and my cousin have both watched them, and I was really surprised. I was like, "Oh, okay."
That's great. That's really good.
Yeah,
And I'm not criticizing anyone because everyone's got so busy and so much going on. I don't expect just because you know me, you have to read every book I've ever written. But it's kind of surprising who does and who doesn't, if that makes sense.
yeah, it is. Yeah, people are weird. That's my conclusion generally.
Yeah, that is fact. I agree with that. Especially Gollum, Harlan Ellis. No, anyway.
Is there a surprising fact you can tell us about yourself?
Oh, this is another one I should have prepared something for, isn't it? So I mentioned it before, didn't I? May as well, I'll use that one. When I was 17, I was in 3 episodes of Corrie as there was an episode where Fresco, the supermarket, got held up by 2 criminals. One of them was this little hard case with a gun called Dean. And he had like a really stupid, dopey mate with bleached hair who was like, oh, let's just nick all the fags and do a runner. And that was me. But my acting career sort of plummeted thereafter, sadly, but never mind.
Well, Tony told me he was country dancing for a girl when he was 10, so that's not quite as shameful.
Yeah, fair enough. I can't compete with
that. And then my last question is, can you tell us where we can find out more about you, your books, and your podcast?
Yeah, most definitely. So I'll do the podcast first. So the podcast is called Dark Natter with an N. That is available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and wherever you get your podcasts. So you just type it in and search for it, and you'll find John and me and Liam. You'll stumble upon our names in the show. I have a website just for my own stuff, the books and everything. That's www.jon-richter.com. That's JON-RICHTER. And so that's just got links to all the books, bit of other weird stuff on there. I tried to do like a little interactive text thing that I thought was fun, but I don't know if anyone's ever. Anyway, have a look at that. And I'm on Twitter at Richter Writes, where I will happily engage in conversation on any topic, unless it's someone showing off that they've got their hands on a PlayStation 5, because I just want to pretend they don't exist now that I'm not going to get one until after Christmas. Sulk.
Well, thank you very much, John. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise. No, brilliant. Thanks so much.